Okay, and then we only have one more chapter, and then we're done. Okay, so really, we have 2 days and one chapter left, and that's it, which is crazy. Okay, so let's buckle down and get going here. When you solve a polynomial equation, you are finding the roots, the zeros, the solutions, which always represent those x-intercepts, which we have talked about that in chapter 4. Okay, where the degree of the polynomial tells you how many solutions you should have. Okay, so remember that the degree is the highest exponent you see. So it says, for example, the function x to the fourth. I would circle that little 4 right there. Okay, that tells me how many solutions I should have. So I should have 4 solutions in that example because my degree is 4. If it was 3, you should have 3. If it's 2, you should have 2. Okay, remember, zeros can have what we call a multiplicity. And that just means that a zero has a multiplicity. You get that same solution more than once. Okay, so the same solution more than once is important there. So for example, this next one, x minus 3, x minus 3, x plus 1. If we want to know the solutions, remember it's always the opposite sign when we solve. Okay, so what would make this one equal to 0? Well, I would add 3 to both sides. So x equals 3 would be that solution. Same here, because x minus 3, it's the same thing. What makes x plus 1 equal to 0 when I solve for it? Yeah, x equals -1. But we don't have to write it more than once. So the zeros of the function are x equals 3 and x equals -1. But when we go back to our problem, it says the degree of the function is what? Well, if we count the x's, there are 1, 2, 3. So the degree is 3. But the function only has 2. And we just talked about how it should have 3. Well, the reason why is because it has this thing called the multiplicity of 2. It just means that that solution shows up twice. That's all that means. So that the function only has 2 x-intercepts due to the fact that 0, x equals 3 happens twice is all it's saying. Okay, all it's saying is that we have only 2 zeros, but because x equals 3 happens 2 times, that's why we have a total of 3. Okay, you can count it 1, 2, 3. So that's kind of just like a background knowledge of something to like, when you're going into a problem, you're diving in, you should know at least how many zeros you should have in the very beginning. Okay, there are a couple ways to figure out your solutions by the graph. So if you ever get stuck on a test, you can always go to y equals and graph it and figure out where it crosses the x-axis. You can do factoring, which we've learned we spent so much time on. Sometimes you might have to use a quadratic formula, and sometimes you have to take the square root. There's all these options. Let's talk about the first one, graphing. This is the easiest one. We can see right off the bat where the zeros are. It's kind of hard to see, but they're at -2. Where else? And 2. Very good. So there are 3. That's it. That's pretty straightforward when you have a graph. When we don't have a graph, you might have to solve algebraically, and that could be tough, especially if you're not that good at factoring. But you could always go to your graph, your graphing calculator, and you can do what we did last week and do synthetic division once you find the zeros, or you can factor. Because I feel like we need to practice with factoring, we're just going to practice factoring, but either way you choose is fine with me. So let's take a look at this very first one. What number goes into 4x cubed, 4, 18, and 10? 2. Okay, so I know that my GCF of this guy is going to be 2 something. And then how many x's can I pull out? X cubed, x squared, or x? Just x. It's always the lowest exponent. So that's my GCF. And we got to figure out what's left over. Now, if it helps you, you can write divide by 2x on each one. You don't have to. Totally up to you. If you can just do it without, I recommend just doing that. Well, here we go. 4 divided by 2 is 2. X cubed divided by x. Careful. X what? Squared. Because look, 3 minus 1 gets me 2. Questions on that? Okay, minus what? 18 divided by 2 is? Careful. 9. And then if I have 2x on top, 1 cancels. I only have 1 left. And then 10 divided by 2 is? 5. And those x's cancel and go away. but it's still all equal to 0. Question. Okay. Now, right away, what I would do to help you out is set both of those factors equal to 0 and solve. Okay, so this guy is going to be equal to 0. Should probably give you highlighters. And then this guy is going to be equal to 0. So I have 2x equals 0 and 2x. You might have to write small on these guys, and I apologize. Okay. This was a hard one. This is probably the hardest one of all of them. Kind of starting it off hard, and the rest of them are okay. You won't get this hard of one on a test from me. Okay. So this very first guy, when I divide both sides by 2, what do I get? 0. That's one of my answers. Okay. One of my 3 answers I should get, because remember, my degree is 3. That means I need 2 more. Now we have to do factor by grouping. Now this was not that fun one. So I'm going to kind of go off to the side here, and I'm sorry again for not having a lot of room, but I'm going to draw an arrow and use that area for some work. What multiplies to -10, it adds to -9. What do you guys think? And that's coming from 2 times -5 gets me -10. So what 2 numbers multiply to -10 but also add to -9? 10 and 1. Yeah, so I have 10 and 1, or 1 and 10, either one. And then which one is going to be negative, the 1 or the 10? The 10. So I have +1 and -10. And I'm sorry again for having, hopefully you're writing small enough here. Now we have to do factor by grouping. You ready for this? You guys are you're getting better at this as time goes on. This middle term breaks down into that +1x and then that -10x. And then I'm going to bring everything down in purple. 2x squared minus 5 equals 0. All right, here we go. Factor by grouping. Group the first 2, group the second 2. The first group. What can I factor out between 2x squared and 1x? 1x, or just x. And let's see what's left over. 2x squared divided by x gives me what? Very good, 2x. 1x divided by 1x gets me 1. Questions on that one? Now we have -10 and -5. What can I factor out? Just 5. -5. Always pull out a negative if you can. See how that's a negative in front? We're going to pull it out. And we're already almost there. 10 divided by 5 gets me 2, so I have 2x. And then 5 divided by 5 gets me 1, which is what we wanted. We want this. Remember when we wanted the same thing in the inside? And very last part of this factoring, here we go. I have x minus 5. And I'm going to just go right to the end. X minus 5 is equal to 0 because that's a factor. And then I have 2x plus 1 is also a factor. So I have 2x plus 1 is equal to 0. Because we're doing the same thing that we've been doing, but now we're just solving for the answer. So that's why the factoring was important, and now we're taking it one step further. So what makes this guy equal to 0, this first one? So we got to do to both sides. Add 5, so I just get 5. That's another 0. That's what I wanted. This one's not as easy. We have to do some subtracting and then dividing. So I subtract 1. I get 2x equals -1. Now what? Yeah, now you divide by 2. And I get -1/2. Just keep it as a fraction. Oop, that looks weird. And we're done. Like I said, that was the hardest one that you'll do. I know that was a lot of work. Okay, but you won't have that hard of one in the future. Okay, but look, my degree was 3, and I have 1, 2, 3 zeros, and that's what you wanted. That's where on the graph you cross the x-axis. Now, don't draw this in. I'm just going to want to make sure that you're understanding what you're doing. You're not blindly doing it. What you just found out is that the graph will intersect here at 0 it'll intersect at 5, like somewhere around here, and then negative 1/2. So you just figured out where those intercepts are. That's what you did. You didn't just do that for nothing. You actually found those. Now, you could have went on your graphing calculator and gotten 2 of those for sure. 0 and 5, you could have figured out for sure. And if you like synthetic division, you could have done synthetic division to get it. It just depends on who you are and what you like. Okay, either one would work for me. Okay, let's look at this next one. This one is the quadratic formula, which isn't that bad, guys. Once you get used to how to use it, I will always give it to you. Or you can memorize it using the Pop Goes the Weasel song. Either one works. Okay, but this one's not factorable, and that's why we have to use it. So I have A is equal to 1, B is equal to -4, and C is equal to 7. And I'm going to use that formula right there. It looks scary, but it's not that bad. Okay, let's just plug it in. X is equal to the opposite sign of B. So I have -4, so I'm going to have what now? 4. Okay, plus or minus the square root of B squared. So B is -4, so I'm going to go -4 squared. I always put it in parentheses because if you don't in your calculator, it's going to give you the wrong answer. -4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 7. Do you have questions on where I got any of these numbers? Because all I'm doing right now is plugging this in. Okay, you're going to get lost if you're texting right now. Let's go. 2 times 1. Okay, now the only part that you have to do right now is what I'm going to highlight. In your calculator, not the square root, just put in -4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 7, and you're going to get your answer. So I have parentheses, -4 squared minus 4, parentheses 1, parentheses 7, and I get -12. What did you guys get? -12, good. So now we're just going to rewrite it. X is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of -12 all over 2. Now, we're not really done. We do have to simplify some more because there are some things that can go into -12. Now, we're looking for perfect squares. What 2 numbers go into 12? What's 2 numbers? What 2 factors? 2 and 6, that works. However, I'm going to go with something that's a perfect square. Is there any perfect squares that go into 12? What'd you say? We have 2 and 6. What else goes into 12? What numbers? 4. 4 and what? 4 times what gets me 12? 3. So I have the square root of 4 and the square root of 3. Do we know one of those square roots? 4. What is it? 2. So that's the answer, and then this guy's going to stay in. Okay? So let's write it one more time. X is equal to 4 plus or minus that 2 that I circled comes out. 2. Now, this is something that's really kind of important to know if you're an SAT person, okay? Or if you're going to go into Math 098. You had your IEP meeting and you know you're going to go into Math 098. Whenever there's a negative under the radical, that creates imaginary numbers. And I know that's not fun to think about imaginary numbers. I'm just trying to figure out real numbers. Okay, but imaginary numbers do exist. They're more for those advanced math when you're trying to like create something like a microwave and those 3-dimensional and the 4D shapes. That's what the I comes in for here. Okay, so there's something called an imaginary number, and that I has to come out. Whenever there is a negative in the radical, you must pull an I out. And that rarely represents a negative under the radical. It's all that means. Okay, then that 3 that we underlined stays in, and the 2. We're almost done. We just have one minor little thing to do because we can simplify a little further. If you look here, we have 4, 2, and 2. Is there a number that goes into 4, 2, and 2? 2. So all we're going to do is divide each one by 2. 4 divided by 2 is plus or minus. Then 2 divided by 2 is 1. You can put a 1 there if you want, but you don't have to. So I'm just going to put the I. Radical 3. You can't do 3. That guy's kind of like a X. You can't do that. And then 2 divided by 2 is 1. So that's it. We're done. Okay. Questions? Yeah. Now we'll get to the easier one. This one's the easiest. We're getting like hard, medium, easy. Okay. So now this one's a lot easier. This is just by taking the square root. All we're gonna do is solve, guys. We're solving for x. What would you do to both sides if you were looking at this problem? Add 9. So I get 2x squared equals something. What do you get? 128. Any questions on where we got that? Oh my God, we're almost there. We only got 2 more steps left. What do I do to both sides next? Divide by 2. Very good. And I get x squared equals something. Good. Very last and final step, you guys. We're good at this in chapter 4. How do I get rid of squared? Yeah, the square root. That's awesome. So I take the square root of both sides. That goes away. And I'm left with x equals what? Square root of 64. 8. Does anyone remember what I talked about in chapter 4? If you take the square root, what must go in front? A lot of people got this wrong on the test when we took it. Yeah, plus or minus. The reason why it's plus or minus, negative 8 squared is 64. That works too. Okay, so that's why. Questions? Okay, now we're going to practice a little bit more on the back. When you're ready, flip. I'm just going to keep practicing here with you guys. These ones are not as hard as the ones that we just did. Okay, so I always kind of like introduce it the hard, and then we kind of like really just take it slow. All right, so here we go on the back page. Now, when we look at this one, this looks like a factoring problem. When you look at your chart on the front page, number 2 says factoring. It looks more like that than any of the other ones. So I'm going to check that one out. I will say that I think you guys have a 4 right here. If you guys can change that to a 3, otherwise it won't work out. Sorry about that. This guy, I think you guys had a 4, and I had to change it to a 3, otherwise it doesn't work. Okay, is there something, a GCF, that can go into 4x cubed, 16x squared, and 12x? 4. And how many x's can I pull out? Cube, squared, or x? X. So I can factor out a 4x in the very beginning. You need to be able to recognize that. It'll help you out in the future. So if it helps you, divide each one by 4x. If you need to write all that out, that's okay. So here we go. 4x cubed divided by 4x gets me what? Very good. Negative 16x squared divided by 4x. Good. Minus 4x. And then someone other than Jamie, 12x divided by 4x gets me, careful with the x, just 3. Here's why. Because the x's will cancel right here. But got the 3 right. Now, we do have to do some factoring, but this is an easier factoring problem. We don't have to do the grouping. We can go right to the end. So now that we have all this room in the world, which is really nice, we're going to go over here. Well, before I do that, I like to set each one equal to 0 first so that we don't lose that 4x. I feel like when people don't set it equal to 0 first, people lose that 4x in the beginning. Okay, so we're going to ask ourselves, I'm going to go off to the side, what multiplies 3 and adds to negative 4? There's only 2 numbers that multiply the 3. What are they? Very good. 1 and 3. Which one or both or neither are gonna be negative? If I want a negative 4. They both have to be negative. Very good. The only way for it to work is if they're both negative. And now that A is 1, if you look in the very beginning, this is a 1. When that happens, you should be excited because you don't have to do the factor by grouping. You just go right to the end. So I have x minus 3 and x minus 1 equals 0. And now we're almost done. Got one more step. Okay, This very first one, what makes 4x equals 0 equal to 0? What do I got to do to both sides? This guy. Divide. When you divide by 4, what do you get? Yeah, so that's one of them. What makes this guy equal to 0? It's always the opposite. Good, a positive 3. And what makes this guy equal to 0? Positive 1. We're done. Now look, the degree was 3, and I got 1, 2, 3. I should be good. I always like to check that. If you only got 2, you're missing one somewhere. You might have forgot that 4x in the beginning, which is very common. People do that all the time. Okay, number 2, I like number 2. 2 is pretty straightforward. 2 is like number 4 in the front. I want you to give it a try because 2 is actually an easy one. If you need to look at something, look at number 4 on the front page. And I'll actually put that up right now so you don't have to flip back and forth. Try number 2. It's just like this one. See if you can do it without me pulling it through it. But I put the example on the board so you don't have to keep flipping back and forth. See if you can do number 2. Gotta solve for x. When you're done and done only, look up and see if you got it right. Now, you need to be able to recognize when you can do this. If you look, there's an x squared and then there's no x. That's how you know you could do this. You wouldn't, so I saw it on the quiz and the test that a lot of people try to do that method for this one. You can't do that. The only time that you can do what we just did right here is when there is no x term at all. So like if there was like a 3x in the middle here, you wouldn't be able to do it. Okay, it's got to have 0 x's in there. Okay, is there any questions on number 2? Starting to get sick, which sucks. Okay, let's look at number 3. This one's another one that's actually pretty easy because look, there are no x terms, are there? So we're going to be able to do it, but we got to figure out how to do it first. Whenever you have 2 factors like this, you can just set them both equal to 0 and solve. So I can set this guy equal to 0 and I can set this guy equal to 0 and solve. So I have 0, well, actually I'm just going to put it in order. X squared minus 16 is equal to 0. And then I have x squared plus 4 equals 0. And now we're back to what we just did on number 2. Because look, there is no x term in the middle here, which is super exciting because it makes it easy. So then I would add 16 to both sides, and I would get x squared equals 16. Now what? What's the opposite of squaring something? Square rooting. So square root, and I get x equals plus or minus what number? 4. Done with that one. Let's talk about this next one because it's a little bit different. Okay, I have to subtract 4 to both sides. So I get x squared equals -4, which is going to result in an issue here because we can't have negatives under the radical. I still take the square root, same thing, But now I have x equals plus or minus 2 what? I. There we go. Whenever you have a negative underneath the radical, you must pull out this imaginary number. And that is really important for the SAT. There are 2 that I saw on the last test that had imaginary numbers in it. And that's what the I represents. If you ever see a little I in any of the problems on the SAT when you take it, it's talking about a negative under the radical. That's what that means. So I don't know if you need to highlight it or do what you need to do to make sure that you know that that negative rate that I is coming from that negative under the radical. Because it is said that I is equal to the square root of -1 is really what that is. And we'll get more into complex numbers in the future here, or imaginary numbers, but that's just kind of like a little taste of what it is. But now you can check, look, I have 4. Look at x squared and x squared would make x to the 4. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. You can still check and make sure you have all 4 that you need. Do you have any questions on that? Okay, last round. Trying to take it a little slow. Do it again. So let's take a look here. This one doesn't look as fun. This one looks like there's some kind of GCF involved because they all have X's. So what can I factor out of all 3 of these? And then what else? X. Very good. Hold on, it went away on me. So I'm going to divide each one by 2x because that's my GCF. And if you don't want to write the 2x on the bottom there, you don't have to. Now let's divide all of them out. 2 divided by 2 is 1. X cubed divided by x is x squared. 4 divided by 2 is 2. X squared divided by x is just x. And then minus 2 because that goes away. It's still all equals 0. And right at the beginning, like I said, I would always just set them both equal to 0 and solve. So 2x equals 0 and x squared plus 2x minus 2 is equal to 0. That's how you solve these things. Well, we know for sure this guy is going to be 0. That's pretty straightforward. We divide by 2. This one, when we think about it, what multiplies a -2 and adds a 2, there is nothing. You only have 1 and 2. There's no way I can multiply a -2 and get 2. When that happens, you have to use a quadratic formula. So let's practice one more time using it, and then we'll be done for today. Okay, so remember, my A value is 1, my B value is 2, and my C value is -2. And we're going to use that quadratic formula. So here we go. X is equal to the opposite sign of B, which is -2, plus or minus the square root of 2 squared, because that's B squared, minus 4, that's part of the formula. A is 1 and C is -2. All over 2 times 1, just 2. All you have to do with your calculator is plug this piece in. And let me know when you get what you get when you do that. So I got 2 squared minus 4 parentheses 1 parentheses -2. And I got positive 12. Is that what you got? Yeah. Okay, which is kind of nice because we already did this on the first page, but there's no negative, which is nice. There's no imaginary numbers. Okay, this now breaks down into the square root of 4 and the square root of 3. We know the square root of 4 is 2. So whenever I circle something, I pull it out. That's how you simplify a radical. So my last answer here is x equals -2 plus or minus that 2 that we just circled. The square root 3 stays in, all over 2. Now, I would have accepted this answer on the test, but you could go further, and on the SAT would be completely simplified. What number goes into all 3 of these pieces here? 2. So when you divide each one by 2, you get -1 plus or minus the square root of 3, and we're done. Because I divided each one, if you want to write it down, each one of them by 2 if you get stuck on where that came from. I know it's a lot, but hopefully it was okay, like maybe not terrible. because factoring we have been doing for a while. There's only 5 questions on your homework. That's it. And you have more than 5 minutes to do it. You have like 10 minutes to do it, actually. Okay, take your time, please. You can find each one in the notes. You can see an example just like it. I will put the key up soon. Please don't put it away. At least try one before you leave to make sure that you're on the right path. But it's only 5 questions. We do that on purpose so that you're not overwhelmed with all of this work and getting it done, but more understanding it. Yep. And I'll make the key right now. Excited for this 3-day weekend.